When I was 9 years old, my stepdad installed a camera in our house, supposedly to protect me from the neighbor next door. But here's the thing, it wasn't pointed at the neighbor's place, it was aimed right at my bedroom. That's when I ran to that same neighbor for help. His name was Ryan, and he had just moved in next door after losing custody of his 2 young daughters. The day Ryan arrived, my stepdad rushed over to me with this weird look on his face. He put his hand on my lower back, too low, if you ask me, and said, "That guy over there? He's a creep." Then he smiled, like he was almost happy about it. I didn't understand why back then, but now I know, he wanted an excuse to keep an eye on me. That night, he set up the security camera. From then on, he started doing these nightly safety checks. Every time my mom fell asleep, he'd come into my room, sit on my bed, and talk about all the terrible things men like Ryan supposedly wanted to do. It made my skin crawl, but I didn't know what to say or do. One day, I finally worked up the courage to tell my mom how uncomfortable Kevin's visits were making me. She was folding laundry in the living room, and I said, "Mom, Kevin keeps coming into my room at night." Before I could even finish, she cut me off without looking up. "Honey, Kevin loves you like his own daughter." "But Mom," I tried again, "the camera he put up is pointing at my window." This time, she actually looked at me, but not because she cared, it was more annoyance than anything else. "Stop being dramatic," she snapped. "Kevin knows what he's doing. He manages security for his business, and he's just trying to protect you from that creep next door who looks at you all the time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Because the truth was, Ryan never even glanced at me, or any kids for that matter. When families walked by, he turned away. The only times he seemed to notice us were when Kevin took me out alone somewhere, like for ice cream or to the park. Then suddenly, Ryan would need to walk his dog or wash his car. And as for Kevin, things got worse. The tickle fights lasted too long. He insisted on giving me baths because Mom worked late. And then there was the tiny bikini he bought me, one that made me feel so uncomfortable I didn't want to wear it. Coincidentally, whenever I had that thing on, Ryan always found something outside to do, like washing his car or walking his dog. But nothing prepared me for what happened one afternoon in the garage. The garage was dimly lit, the single bulb hanging from the ceiling flickering slightly as if it couldn't decide whether to stay alive or give up entirely. Kevin had asked me to help him find something, an old toolbox, he said, and I followed him inside reluctantly. My stomach churned with unease, but I didn't want to make a scene. After all, Mom always told me to be polite and helpful. As soon as we stepped in, the door clicked shut behind us. The sound echoed through the space, sharp and final. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. "What are we looking for again?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Kevin turned to face me, his expression unreadable. For once, there was no fake smile plastered across his face. Instead, he looked serious. Too serious. He took a step closer, and instinctively, I backed away until my back hit the cold metal shelf lined with paint cans and gardening tools. "You know," he began, his tone low and measured, "your mom trusts me completely. She thinks I'm doing everything right by you." His eyes locked onto mine, and I felt trapped under their weight. "But lately, you've been acting strange. Like you don't trust me." I shook my head quickly, panic rising in my throat. "No, that's not true." "It is true," he interrupted, his voice firm now. "You've been talking about things you shouldn't. Things that could get people into trouble." He leaned in closer, his breath warm against my face. "Like the camera. Or Ryan." My knees buckled beneath me, and I slid down to the floor, clutching the edge of the shelf for support. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them back fiercely. I wouldn't let him see me cry. "Not here. Not now. Please," I whispered, barely audible. "I won't say anything else. I promise." For a long moment, Kevin just stood there, staring at me like he was deciding what to do next. Then, slowly, he straightened up and exhaled sharply through his nose. "Good," he said, his voice softer but still laced with warning. "Because if you do," he trailed off, letting the threat hang heavy in the air between us. Without another word, he opened the garage door and walked out, leaving me alone in the suffocating darkness. My body trembled uncontrollably, and I hugged my knees to my chest, trying to calm myself down. But deep down, I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't stay silent anymore. Later that night, after everyone else had gone to bed, I crept out of the house and made my way to Ryan's front porch. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the flashlight I brought with me. Taking a deep breath, I knocked lightly on the door, hoping he'd hear me. A few seconds passed before the light above the porch flickered on, and Ryan appeared in the doorway, wearing a pair of sweatpants and a hoodie. His hair was messy, like he'd been asleep, but his expression softened when he saw me standing there. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, concern etched onto his face. "Are you okay?" I hesitated, tears streaming down my cheeks now. How could I explain everything? Would he even believe me? But then I remembered the way he always avoided eye contact when Kevin was around, the way he seemed to sense something was off. Maybe he already knew. "I need your help," I choked out finally. "Please. I don't know who else to turn to." Ryan knelt down in front of me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Tell me what's going on," he said softly. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I believed someone might actually listen. Ryan ushered me inside, his movements calm but deliberate. He closed the door quietly behind us, as if he didn't want to draw attention, then led me to the small living room. The space was simple, just a worn couch, a coffee table stacked with books, and a few framed photos on the walls. It smelled faintly of pine cleaner and something warm, like freshly baked bread. "Here," he said softly, handing me a blanket from the back of the couch. "Sit down. You're shaking." I wrapped the blanket tightly around myself, grateful for its weight. My teeth were still chattering, though whether from fear or cold, I couldn't tell. Ryan sat across from me in an armchair, leaning forward slightly with his elbows resting on his knees. His eyes were steady, kind, but also searching, as if he was trying to piece together what had happened without pushing too hard. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. The words felt heavy leaving my lips, like admitting them aloud would make them impossible to take back. But I trusted Ryan. Somehow, I knew he wouldn't dismiss me the way Mom always did. "You don't have to be afraid here," he said firmly, his tone reassuring. "Whatever you need to say, it stays between us." "Okay." I nodded, swallowing hard. Then, haltingly at first, I began to talk. I told him about the camera pointed at my bedroom window, the nightly visits from Kevin, the uncomfortable touches that lingered just a second too long. About how Mom refused to listen when I tried to tell her, brushing off my concerns as childish paranoia. And finally, about the garage, the way Kevin had cornered me, his voice low and menacing, making it clear that I wasn't supposed to speak up again. Ryan listened intently, his jaw tightening as I spoke. When I finished, there was a long silence, broken only by the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. For a moment, I worried I'd made a mistake telling him. What if he thought I was overreacting? Or worse, what if he decided it wasn't his place to get involved? But then he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly through his nose. "Thank you for trusting me enough to share this," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know it couldn't have been easy." Tears welled up in my eyes again, but this time they weren't just from fear, they were tears of relief. Someone finally believed me. The next morning, Ryan called in sick to work. Instead, he spent hours sitting at his kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, jotting down notes while I paced nervously nearby. Every so often, he'd ask me questions, clarifying details about dates, times, specific incidents. Each question felt like peeling back another layer of pain, but Ryan's calm demeanor kept me grounded. "I think we should go to the police," he said finally, setting the pen down. "But before we do, I want to make sure we have everything documented. If they take your story seriously, and they should, it'll help to have all the facts straight." My stomach twisted at the thought of going to the authorities. What if they didn't believe me? What if Mom found out and blamed me for causing trouble? But Ryan seemed confident, and his confidence gave me strength. "We can start small," he added, noticing my hesitation. "First, let's call Child Protective Services. They'll know how to handle this properly. And if anyone tries to shut us down," he paused, his expression hardening. "We won't stop until someone listens." Over the next few days, Ryan became my anchor. He helped me practice what to say when we filed the report, coached me through potential questions, and even accompanied me to the CPS office when the time came. Sitting beside him in the sterile waiting room, I felt a strange mix of terror and hope. This was it, the moment where things might finally change. When our names were called, Ryan stood up with me, his hand lightly resting on my shoulder. "You've got this," he whispered. "And no matter what happens, I'm right here." As we walked into the interview room, I realized something: I wasn't alone anymore. Whatever lay ahead, I had someone fighting alongside me, and that made all the difference. Of course, nothing ever goes perfectly according to plan. When the investigator asked why I hadn't reported Kevin sooner, I stumbled over my answer. Memories of Mom's dismissive comments flooded back, making me doubt myself all over again. But Ryan stepped in, calmly explaining how intimidating it must have been for a child to come forward against someone in such a position of power. By the end of the meeting, the investigator promised to look into my claims thoroughly. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that nothing would come of it. People like Kevin always seemed to slip through the cracks, didn't they? That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I heard footsteps approaching my room. My heart raced, dread pooling in my chest. Was Kevin coming to check on me? Had he somehow figured out what I'd done? But instead of Kevin's shadow appearing in the doorway, it was Ryan's voice, soft and reassuring, that broke the silence. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm staying here tonight. On the floor, if you don't mind. Just in case." Relief washed over me, and for the first time in weeks, I fell asleep without fear gripping my chest. The investigation dragged on for months, each day feeling like an eternity. During that time, Ryan became more than just my neighbor. He became my protector, my advocate, and, in some ways, the father figure I'd never had. He taught me how to set boundaries, how to trust my instincts, and most importantly, how to find my voice. In the end, the truth came out, not just about Kevin, but about everything he'd done to manipulate and control those around him. Even Mom, who had initially refused to believe me, eventually saw the evidence and broke down in tears, apologizing profusely for not listening sooner. Kevin was arrested, charged, and sentenced to prison. Our lives changed forever after that, but for the better. With Ryan's support, I began to heal, learning to see myself not as a victim, but as a survivor. Years later, when I looked back on that dark chapter of my life, I realized something profound. Sometimes, the people who step in when no one else will are the ones who save you. And Ryan? He didn't just save me, he gave me back my future. The years that followed Kevin's arrest were a blur of change, growth, and healing. For the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe freely, like the weight that had been crushing me for so long had finally lifted. But freedom wasn't something I took for granted anymore. It was fragile, precious, and I guarded it fiercely. Mom and I moved out of the house we'd shared with Kevin shortly after his conviction. She sold it quickly, saying she couldn't bear to stay there any longer. We rented a small apartment on the other side of town, far enough away that I didn't have to worry about running into anyone from our old life. Ryan stayed behind in his little house next door, but he visited often, always bringing groceries or books or just sitting quietly with me when I needed company. At first, Mom tried to make up for lost time, showering me with affection and apologies. She promised me over and over again that she'd never let anyone hurt me like that ever again. But no matter how sincere her words were, there was still a distance between us, a chasm carved by years of mistrust and neglect. It would take more than promises to bridge it, and even though I wanted to forgive her completely, part of me couldn't forget how easily she'd dismissed my pain. Ryan noticed the tension between us. One evening, while Mom was at work, he pulled me aside during one of his visits. "You don't have to rush this," he said gently. "Healing doesn't happen overnight, not for you, and not for her either. Give yourselves permission to take your time." His words stuck with me. Slowly, I began to understand that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, it was about finding a way to move forward without letting bitterness consume me. And so, bit by bit, Mom and I started rebuilding what we'd lost. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and for now, that was enough. As I grew older, Ryan continued to play an important role in my life. He became more than just a protector, he was a mentor, a confidant, and eventually, a friend. When I turned 16, he taught me how to drive in the empty parking lot behind his building. When I struggled with math homework, he patiently walked me through problems until they made sense. And when I started thinking about college, he encouraged me to dream big, telling me stories about his own daughters and how proud he was of everything they'd accomplished despite their challenges. But there were moments when I saw glimpses of sadness in him too. Late at night, when he thought I wasn't looking, I'd catch him staring at photos of his girls on the mantle, his expression wistful. Sometimes, he'd talk about them, their laughter, their quirks, the dreams they used to share, but only briefly, as if opening that door was both painful and necessary. One evening, after dinner, I finally worked up the courage to ask him about them. "What happened?" I said softly, sitting across from him at the kitchen table. "Why aren't they with you anymore?" Ryan hesitated, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee mug. Then, with a deep sigh, he began to explain. His ex-wife had accused him of being unfit, claiming he worked too much and wasn't present enough for the kids. The court battle had been brutal, leaving him drained and defeated. Though he'd fought hard to prove otherwise, the system hadn't been on his side. "I miss them every single day," he admitted, his voice cracking slightly. "But I know they're happy where they are. That's what matters most." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You're a good dad, Ryan," I told him earnestly. "Anyone can see that." For a moment, he looked surprised, as if he hadn't expected those words from me. Then, slowly, a small smile spread across his face. "Thank you," he murmured. "That means a lot." By the time I graduated high school, I'd begun to think of Ryan as family. At my graduation ceremony, he sat proudly in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else when they called my name. Later, at the celebratory dinner Mom threw for me, he handed me a gift, a leather-bound journal with my initials embossed on the cover. "This is for all the adventures you're about to have," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Write them down, okay? So someday, you can look back and remember exactly how incredible you are." Tears welled up in my eyes as I hugged him tightly. "I don't know what I would have done without you," I whispered. He chuckled softly, ruffling my hair like he used to when I was younger. "You're stronger than you think, kiddo. Always have been." College took me hundreds of miles away, to a bustling city full of possibilities. Saying goodbye to Ryan was harder than I'd anticipated. As I stood on the porch of his house, suitcases packed and ready to go, I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Promise me you'll visit," I said, blinking back tears. "I promise," he replied, pulling me into a warm embrace. "And you call me anytime, day or night. You hear me?" I nodded, clutching him tightly before stepping back. "Thank you, for everything." As I drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror one last time, I realized that Ryan had given me more than safety or support. He'd given me hope, the belief that even in the darkest moments, there are people who will stand by you, who will fight for you when you can't fight for yourself. Years later, as I built a life of my own, a career, friendships, love, I carried that lesson with me. No matter where I went or what I achieved, I knew I owed it all to the man who had once been my neighbor, but who had become so much more. Ryan wasn't just my savior, he was proof that kindness exists in unexpected places, waiting to light the way when the world feels impossibly dark. And because of him, I learned to shine my own light, too.